Hello, I'm Judy Maggio on behalf of everyone at Austin PBS. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. With me today are three community leaders whose life experiences and life's work can teach us all concrete ways to combat and confront racism in our own lives. So let me introduce you to them. We have Chaz Moore, who is the founder of the Austin Justice Coalition, Mimi Stiles, president and founder of Measure, and Simone Talma Flowers, executive director of Interfaith Action of Central Texas. All three of you are on the front lines working hard every day to fight racism in our community. And what I love about this panel is you all come at it from very different perspectives and different arenas. Chaz is working very hard to hold the police and local leaders accountable. Mimi is providing vital facts and figures to fight systemic racism every day. And Simone helps lead the faith community in helping find ways to touch people's hearts. So these are deep perspectives, and we thank you all for sharing your wisdom with us today. My first question is this. We've been in these conversations, all of us, before. Somehow this feels different. Perhaps the backdrop of this pandemic that has hit communities of color in such profound, disparate ways, the outcry over the horrific killing of George Floyd and the protests that have ensued. I feel this sense of urgency of this moment in time. Do you think that urgency will finally provide a framework where meaningful action lasting action can take place? You know what, I'll start with you, Chaz.
First, Judy, just thank you for having me and having us. And to answer the question, I really hope so. I think there's something quite different in the atmosphere compared to, marches and protests and movements years ago, marches and protests from decades ago. It seems that the conversation has shifted towards not just, we need this reform, we need this fix, right? Like this police thing or this housing thing or this economic thing. It seems that we really want to get to the core of the problem, which is racism, which is white supremacy, which is anti-Blackness. And I think, to me, that gives me hope that we as a country, that we as a people really want to do the work to unpack that and begin to move and really think outside these boxes that we've been operating in, because we see now that they just don't work. And, I am hopeful that this is a unique time that we're in, and that people actually want to get to that more perfect union, to get to like life and liberty and pursuit of happiness for all. It seems that for the first time ever, right, when we look at the fact there are protests in every state in the country, and the fact that the Amish, right, the people that don't even interact with society are in society, standing up, fighting for, Black lives and for a better world. So, I think, I think this is different. Absolutely.
Mimi?
Yeah, I totally agree with Chaz and echo that this is different. This is 100% absolutely different. And the framework, I believe, has been set for many, many, many years. And for generations, we've advocated for this. This is the moment, I believe, or this has the potential to be the moment where the country and the world takes a step back and accounts for the atrocities done onto the Black body everywhere. I mean, in every country and every continent, the Black man and the Black woman are oppressed in one way or another, right? And so what we're seeing right now is, again, every country, like almost every country, rallying around this idea of life and of the value of Black life. So it's incredibly different, but I also think that We understand strategy, we organizers, we advocates, we know what to do and how to operate in this environment, and we've done it. Many of the reforms that we're calling for right now are ones that we've been calling for. And so this is the time. And unfortunately, in many cases, it takes people that don't look like us to have to understand and experience the pain that our brothers and sisters have seen and gone through forever. And so this is now this, incredible opportunity to strategize and to prove it with data that change is really going to come.
Simone.
This is going to stay for a long time. And we have seen it with our own eyes. I mean, we cannot not see the callous taking of life of George Floyd and all the George Floyds in this world. And we cannot turn away. And I believe this instant has brought to us where it's like, we cannot look away. We have to change our hearts and we have to change our actions to make a difference. And we have everyone's attention right now. And I believe, when we started off 2020, we just didn't know it was going to be like this. And I tell you what, 2020 has changed the world already, and we are in the beginning of June. And I believe, again, one of the biggest issues that we are facing is that we think maybe it's not our problem. But the fact is, it is all our problem. This is an issue that we can't move forward without everyone being involved. And this is the time we can change lives, become anti-racist, and dedicate our lives. This is a lifestyle change, and calling upon every individual to make that lifestyle change. This is and I've heard Mimi talk about this is a movement. So this is a time. This is a time when we can make a difference. I spoke to my nephew yesterday who lives in Trinidad, and he was saying, this is a revolution. And he's 16 years old. And and I was like, yes, it is a revolution. We're in a revolution.
And for this revolution to have all of the foot soldiers that it needs, I want to quote something that Mimi said when we were talking, and I want you to elaborate on this, Mimi. You said, it's critical that people in the audience today assess whether they are listening to hear or listening to believe. Can you elaborate on it?
Yeah, definitely. And I've been kind of saying that in different circles, and especially to our white allies and co-conspirators, right? Like, you can listen, and that is a beautiful thing. Like, people need to be heard. But in many cases, you can listen and choose not to act and choose not to believe the stories of those that are hurting. And I've had so many people that have questioned, even myself in asking to be believed. And so when you are faced with that, that's when you know that there's a problem, right? When you're being questioned with your own story. At Measure, we believe in the stories of people that are most impacted by these data disparities, by these issues, that their stories should be qualified as data that can then be used to change policy or to question policy or to block policies or to create new normals and new ways. But that comes with believing. That comes with believing the stories of those that have been there, done that, experienced this. And I put on my hat, especially in conversations like this. I'm a mom. I have a mom. I have two Black sons that are almost 6 feet tall. You know, one's a big, huge football player, as dark as they get, beautiful with dreads, you know, and I'm afraid every single day, every single day, every single night. When he texts me like at a crazy time at night, I'm literally afraid that when we talk about the talk, we have that conversation with our boys. Almost every single Black family does. When, you know, and so these stories are true. And I feel like it's just like now I feel like people are believing us, you know, instead of just standing you know, protesting or marching along with us, they're actually believing us. But again, that's going to be measured. That's going to be measured.
Chaz, enlighten the people in the audience who are not familiar with the talk about the talk.
Yeah, and I remember we had the special a couple of years ago, right?
Sure did.
Right after the David Joseph shooting. And you know, for the folks watching, please bear with me. My allergies are like killing me right now.
We're living in Austin.
Right. But you know, the fact that in many African American homes, especially where there's, like Mimi mentioned, where there's young African American men involved, we have to either have the talk or initiate the talk about potential, you know, interactions with police. Right. This is what you do if you have to, you know, interact with officers so you can survive the day and get home. As opposed, you know, the talk in most other households in America is the birds and bees or whatever. But the fact that we even have to have that conversation to make sure that we can at least survive that situation is just, you know, very, very harrowing, you know? So, you know, that's the talk. That's the talk that Mimi, I'm sure, has had with her sons. That's the talk that many of us have had with our parents and our grandparents. And it's unfortunate. And I think people are at a place today where we don't want to have that talk anymore, right? We just want to be able to go out and exist and be and live like everyone else.
You know, Austin has a reputation as being a very laid back, liberal city. But I think that the events of the past week have certainly once again forced a sort of reckoning of our deep-rooted inequality and segregation in the history of this community. I am sure it's exhausting for all of you who've been on the front lines of this work for a very long time. But locally, from an Austin perspective, do you see this as the watershed moment here? Or are we still in the foothills of this battle? Simone, why don't you start with that one?
I have heard so many people say that they have lived in Austin, and one pastor said it how in Austin, it's a nice kind of racism that we deal with, and not the overt one. It's the one that, you know, we come to meetings, we will work really hard to have a plan to get things done, and then nothing happens, right? And so we kind of do this over and over again. And I think that's where a lot of the exhaustion happens. And it's like, at this moment in time, I feel as though, you know, with Mimi and Chaz and all this young energy, different energy, I feel as though we can make some changes and hold everyone accountable. And I think, you know, I would just like to see us move forward and not having to revisit this 50 years from now again. It's like, what's going to happen in 2 years? What's going to happen in 10 years? What do we want to see? And so I am, you know, pleading for all our Austin family to let's wake up to this, please, and do what we need to do to take action. Yeah.
Mimi, is Austin waking up finally?
You know, anecdotally, yes, definitely. I mean, just what, Chaz and all of the organizers put together the other day, or yesterday rather, just was evident of Austin waking up. But again, we have to remember that if we get too kumbaya-ish in this conversation, then we're going to lose the strategy, and we're going to lose what needs to be accounted for again in numbers. We have to remember that each year, 1,000 people are shot and killed by police, about 1,000. This year, I think we're up to maybe 1,043 people. Every single year, that number has not really fluctuated in the last few years. Black people are shot at a much more disproportionate rate than anyone else. No matter what the naysayers say about, white people are shot. No, Black people are shot about 2 times as much as a white person in America. Brown folks are also up there in those numbers. We know that Black girls are seen as less innocent starting at the age of 5 years old, which also leads to criminalization. We know that brown, especially brown, but Black and brown people right now are most impacted by COVID-19. We know that all of this is happening. We know that, in terms of home ownership and economic justice, it's completely unfair. Black people, their medium home values is about half of what white people have in this city. And so yes, wake up, stay woke, but then let's get behind this atrocity and change it for people. We always have this talk about, reparations in my community, and I'm 100% an advocate for it. Why? Because the racial wealth gap, the value that's placed upon Black life is evident in the numbers. And it's not until we change that are we really going to see some major changes and reforms.
Chaz, no one is on the front lines in a more visible way than you in this city. Watershed moment, or still just in the foothills of the fight?
I think the most honest way for me to answer that question is by just saying, I don't know. Although I am eternally grateful for the massive amount of people that came out yesterday, and the people that have been out, for 10 days straight. It's hard to say it's a watershed moment because we haven't seen the policies yet, right? We haven't seen the economic tilts towards equity and equality. I'm seeing people raise their fist and taking a knee, which is great. But until we actually feel the systemic institutional shifts, it's very hard for me to say whether or not we've woken up. What I do think is happening, I think people are leaning in to the conversation about racial equity and racial justice, like in a very serious way. But just because you're leaning in doesn't mean you've committed to doing that work, whether that's, institutionally or personally or whatever. So I think time will tell, and I don't think we have too much time to wait, right? I think that's like Simone said, I don't think this is okay, we're doing this for 5 years down the line. No, we need to see some actual fast changes within, the next couple of weeks, days, months, before the year's up. So I hope, but only time will tell, in my opinion.
We promised people we were going to give them some actionable ways to fight racism in their own lives. So I want to start this section of the discussion with a quote from author and historian Ibram X. Kendi, he's given me a big wake-up call as a white privileged person. I've tried to read a lot of what he has to say, and it has resonated with me. And he says, there is no such thing as being not racist. Inaction in the face of racism is, in fact, a form of racism. So what I would like for each of you to talk about is the need for all of us to become or be anti-racist. Explain more about what that really means to a lot of the white people watching right now. Simone, you want to start with that one?
Actually, I was like, Mimi, that's Mimi.
All right, Mimi, you start. You start this conversation, because we talked about this before we started live streaming, and you did have some poignant, wonderful things to say. So you talk about that first, my friend.
Okay, and because Simone said so, I'm going to do exactly what Simone said. There's no argument ever with Miss Simone. So yeah, I mean, you know, we talked earlier about what it looks like to just say, no, I'm not racist, and you know, I support you, versus saying I am an anti-racist. And so one of the first one could be done in still and in no movement, and it could be done in the comforts of your home and your privilege, without anyone ever knowing or seeing that you are not racist, right? The other is being anti-racist, and that's an action. That's the expectation that we have now of everyone that says that, you know, that they're in this fight and that they are for Black life. We're looking for those anti-racists that are willing to put their time, their treasure, their energy into supporting this revolution, like Simone mentioned, into supporting the work on the front line, like that, you know, Chaz and so many other groups are leading. We're looking for those that are willing to redirect and reallocate funding from one entity that is known, you know, for its racist tendencies to ones that actually work and make sense, right? We're looking for people to understand that this movement is not going to be and should not just be a moment in time. And we also want people to understand that, you know, we have our own also, you know, George Floyd right here in Austin that we have to remember. We have to remember to say their names. People like Morgan Rankins, people like David Joseph, who was a 17-year-old Black boy who was naked and running down the street past a cop and was shot several times and murdered in the street, 17 years old. We have to remember all of those people, and you have to learn, right? That's what we're asking also for those that want to be anti-racist, is to understand the history, learn the history of really learn the history of policing, where it started, right? Back in the 1830s, they took the watchmen and turned them into slave patrols to represent their earliest form of like organized policing. That was really all about managing their slaves, making sure that their commodity got back home. That's the talk when Chaz was explaining so eloquently, the talk that yes, I've had to have with my son several times over. That talk is also very historic. I'm sure that my great-great-great-great-grandfather had to have the talk with his son before he, went to one slave plantation to the next, to remind him, don't look in Mass's eyes when you walk, or don't do this, don't do that, to make sure he got back safely. So being anti-racist is understanding the history, is believing the stories of Black people, and it's reallocating funding, and it's being proven by the numbers.
It sounds like part of this is what Chaz and I talked about the other day, and what you said to me, Chaz, is that this movement is about more than policing. It's about understanding who has to do the work. Talk a little bit more about that. Who has to do this work to make it a victory in this revolution?
Yeah, I think like I said yesterday, and like I said many other times before, the place where we are in history today, like this moment in time, is not for Black people. It's not for people of color. It's for white people. It's for the people that benefit from the system and the power structures that's, that are in place. Black people and other people of color have marched and, engaged in this system in every way possible, from from slave rebellion to voting to, everything, and nothing really seems to get the job done. And that's because, in my belief, like Angela Davis says, with her definition of radical, by grabbing something at the root, like the root of the problem. We understand that this entire thing is built on racism and white supremacy, and in my opinion, again, anti-blackness, right? So, and the issue with that is, like, that's not a black people's thing. Like, that's, none of us on this line can fix that. And, like Toni Morrison said so perfectly, if you only feel tall because we are on our knees, that has nothing to do with me. That speaks volumes about white people and the culture that they've really cultivated around that whole mindset, right? We can only be in power or feel good about ourselves if we demean, deface, kill, harm, incarcerate people of color, black people. So if that's to be true, which I don't have any evidence that argues otherwise, that means white people have to do whatever that work is, to just really fix all of this, like, because there's nothing we can do. And I've really been thinking about it, and I hope this catches on. I don't think it's a white, like a white superiority complex. I think white people feel inferior with themselves for whatever reason, and I think because of that, they need this system to operate the way it does. And it's and I know that sucks, because I know people hear that and they want to get defensive, which is fine. I think that's part of it. But yeah, I think, again, where we are as a country, where we are as a nation, as a people, really depends on what white people are willing to do. But because, again, there's the people that have been oppressed have done almost everything besides just, like, leave and go to another planet. Like, that's, so, at this point, I'm not telling black people that they need to vote any harder. I'm not telling black people that they need to be, civically engaged anymore, because, like we're at a point in time where black women are, they hold scholarship more than any other group and demographic of people. Like, we have black people that are, excelling, entrepreneurially and in business. We're climbing all these ladders, but we're still dying. We're still, over represented in the criminal legal system, like incarceration wise. Black women are still dying because their doctors don't want to listen to them. So it's at some point, we have to realize that we, black people, other people of color, are not the problem. And white people have to look in that mirror, and it's hard. It's extremely hard. Like, men are doing it now. Like, men are understanding, like, oh, I may be a good guy, but I'm giving in to, like, this whole patriarchy complex, and, like, I have to do some of that work as a man. But white people have to get in that mirror and actually do, like Mimi and Simone talked about earlier, you have to do that anti-racist work, because it's one thing to, condemn somebody that is a known arsonist, right? Somebody that's burning down houses. Like, you can say, oh, that's a shame, I don't approve of that. But what are you doing to actually put that fire out? Like, it's like white people have to get to work and really undo. That's why it's called undoing racism. Because it's so deep, and you can't just let it, it's not going to unravel itself. So, like, white people have to undo and relinquish that power and that privilege so we can actually get to equality and, more importantly, equity. You can't just let it like this monster is not going to kill itself. We have to actively, all of us, engage in undoing the work that for like, you know, eons has kept Black people and other people of color down.
Simone, becoming an anti-racist, being an anti-racist, living as an anti-racist, your observations.
So what I want to say too is back to Central Park with Amy Cooper. When she made that call and she, you know, I'm threatened, my life is threatened. It's an African-American man. You know, it's those whistles. Well, it wasn't a whistle. I mean, she said it, right? And it was the intentionality behind it, right? And I believe what was so painful is that every Black person in the world knew about that threat, and it just raised that alarm and that sorrow that we have, and we know that power of that threat. And so when we talk about how can we be anti-racist, it's like, what can you do within your own homes, in your spheres of influence, to fight for Black lives, fight for brown lives? And I specify Black lives because, you know, I feel as though Black people throughout the world are looked at as less than human, as not enough. So if we focus on Black lives, and it's like the rising tide raises all boats, I feel as though we need to ask ourselves that question: what am I doing within my influence to make a change? Why am I not outraged? Why am I seeing the neighborhood next to me not having the services that it needs to be able to thrive? Why is it the schools next to my school district or the other schools within my school district are not having the resources it needs? The thing is, we think we may live in a bubble, but we don't. We have to make sure that people who are underprivileged have access to resources. There's no other way. We have to do our part and fight for each other. And this is, you know, we're in this revolution, and it's a revolution of the heart. It's about changing our heart to say that I'm fighting for my children, and I'm fighting for every other child. And until we are willing to fight every day, you know, just kicking the bucket down the road. We have to commit to this movement, to this lifestyle change.
Simone, I know that you come from a spiritual perspective in many ways, and this whole idea of changing people's hearts is so critical to your view of this. What else do you think it will take to change people's hearts?
It's us talking with each other. It is us being with each other. It's a lot of work, and it's hard work, because we say things and we do things that sometimes are not fully conscious, right? But it's like, how do we commit to saying that, you know what, we are going to be in this space, and we're going to do, I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to be accountable so that I can do better. I can be better. Okay. And it's uncomfortable work, but it's like, let's stay in that discomfort. It's okay. We don't have to be comfortable all the time. Let's do it. And it's every day in our congregations. I'm an immigrant. I've been here 33 years. I'm from Trinidad, and we have so many immigrants that live here. And I'm reaching out to our immigrant Caribbeans, Africans, even our Muslim community, our Hindu community, our diverse faith communities. We have to take action. We have to be a part of this fight and say no more. And this is like, we are all in this together. And again, the problem is that we think it's not our problem. It is our problem.
Mimi, your work provides facts and figures to help fight systemic inequities and racism in our world. You gave me some data that was eye-opening. You said during Reconstruction, the Black community acquired 1.5% of American wealth, and it's not much more than that today. So what are ways we can put our money where our mouth is?
Yeah, that's one of the points of evidence that I always kind of go back to. Whenever I'm trying to understand the Black plight, is I always look at data and facts and figures and numbers like that of like how much of the economic wealth do Black people own and control, right? And it's not much at all. We haven't moved much from that number still today. And so, there are so many ways that you can take actionable steps to change that. I think one is like what we just saw a couple of days ago, the blackout, right? Like so many people that I would never have suspected to have a blacked out Facebook, profile picture saying that I'm supporting Black life. Like so many people that I would have never expected was doing that. So many people are waking up to the fact that there are some fantastic organizations on the ground that are doing social justice work that literally do not get resources whatsoever. And I'm not even going to mention my organization. Like we even have a little bit of a sense of like some funding, right? But there's so many that literally do the work just off of the, blood, sweat, and their own passion every single day, completely unsustained. And so to know that people are now getting support that they need, especially from those that have it, is one way that we can change that narrative. To start even counting Black people, right? Like we're in our organization, we're really doing some work against what's called adultification bias. And it's proven again through data that again, Black, brown, white, yellow, everyone looks at Black girls as less innocent starting at the age of 5 years old, right? But a lot of times we're trying to even understand how deep that even goes we can't understand it because no one is counting Black girls. Like they're not disaggregating data. And when I say disaggregating data, it's kind of a big word. It's unpacking data so that we're able to even count and understand how deep the systemic racism goes in our community because we're not even being counted. Even with this movement now, a lot of Black women are not even being talked about, right? During this time, names like, Charlena Lyles or Corinne Gaines or Sandy Bland or Alexis Christian, Breonna Taylor rather, those names aren't being talked about as much as they need to be talked about right now. So these are very tangible ways to change that, right? Like reallocating funding, counting Black women. These are just some simple ways.
Since we're talking about money, one of the things that has come up has led to a question from one of our audience members, and there's been a lot of talk about defunding police. And I know that this is not all about acts of police violence, but it certainly helped spark a lot of this movement that's happening right now. So the question is, please explain how community policing and defunding of police forces can create safer, more equitable communities while decreasing taxpayer annual spending. That's the question from one of the people watching today. And I'm going to give that one to you, Chaz. This whole idea of funding for police forces or not.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, right? Because as an organization, we've always tried to imagine a world where we don't need police, right? Because again, I think if you understand the origins of policing and how police departments police, it's just not something that we think is a testament to public safety. If anything, we consider it like a public safety hazard. So the fact that the question is framed around, how does community policing and defunding police, get to this end goal? Like those two can exist, right? Like we think, honestly, right? Like when we look at what's going on in Minneapolis right now, where they have, kind of agreed to disband the police, we think, and people think this is crazy, but we think that's the way to go. And it's been done before. It's happened in New Haven, Connecticut, where the police department was so out of whack. They said, okay, we have to start this thing over from the ground. And I think what needs to be cleared up when people are talking about defund the police and disband the police, it's not so much that we just, hate this thing so much, let's just get rid of it. It's like, no, we know that this is not a way to achieve public safety goals, right? So let's try, prime example, in Eugene, Oregon, I believe, they have the Cahoots program. Cahoots came in and took over, I believe, 90% of Eugene, Oregon's PD's mental health calls. And what has happened with that, nobody that is going through mental health duress has died, because these people are trained sufficiently, they're educated sufficiently to deal with people in those types of situations. But what we do in Austin and what we do in other places is, in order to achieve public safety goals, we put more money into the police. And then we wonder why we don't get the desired outcomes, right? So instead of putting $400 million in police, let's take some of that money and invest in Austin public health that we know is underfunded. Let's put some of that money in parks, in rec centers, in Black and brown neighborhoods, because we know what those look like compared to neighborhoods on the West Side. Let's take some of that money and put it into new and creative public safety, initiatives like Cahoots and other things that work, like needle exchange programs, right? Like we know these things work. They don't work just on a national level. They work internationally. So I think, again, we just have to get to a place to where we as Americans have to critically analyze the role of policing today, right? Like police were here to police and catch runaway slaves. We shorthandedly, abolished slavery, right? I mean, and that's up for debate. Like, you watch 13th. But when we abolished slavery, we didn't talk about this mechanism that was used to keep slavery intact. We never once said, okay, slavery's gone, so what do we do with this thing now? So that leads me to believe, this thing is going to operate the way it was meant to operate. And, if we got rid of slavery and we never once had the question about, okay, how do we change this or fix this in a very serious way if we even need it? Like we have to come to terms with that. We have to realize that maybe this thing isn't all wrapped up what it is to be, because in my opinion, police is here to protect and serve the status quo, and it's here to protect white people. That's why, Amy Cooper in the park said, I'm going to call the police because this black man, she was feared. She was feared for her safety. So I'm going to call the thing. I'm going to call an institution that's here to protect me, because she knew immediately what that institution was going to do to him and what position that was going to put him in. Right. So, the funding of the police is all about looking at alternative ways to increase and enhance public safety, because we have to get outside of this notion that public safety and policing are hand in hand. That's not true. Public safety is so much bigger and broader than policing, right? Like public safety is literally, Mimi likes to talk about data, like data shows that if we have more well-lit neighborhoods, crime goes down. That's public safety, right? So it's like things like of that nature, because policing is not working. Policing is a public health hazard if you look like anybody on this line outside of you. So I hope that answers you the question, and I hope they don't write you a nasty email after that.
I saw I have another audience question, but I saw Mimi and Simone nodding a lot during this idea of restructuring how policing is done and allocation of money. And I know it's something former Police Chief Art Aceveda has talked very openly about, how we need to kind of start from ground zero about the way we train, the way we fund, where we're putting money in policing. Would the two of you agree with some of the things that Chaz said? Mimi, I'll let you start.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, 100% behind what Chaz said. We have to be very, very, very careful as a nation to not weaponize. I heard Senator Cory Booker talk about this earlier today, to not weaponize the calls for action, but to stop and understand. We weaponized, and I'm not we, because I know I didn't, but several people weaponized Black Lives Matter. And we had to do so much work to just prove that Black life is valuable. And we're still having to do that. And so we have to be very, very careful about about taking, the words defund the police, which is something that we have been calling for, to be clear, for a very long time, about reallocating resources. It's not new, right? It's not new. This is what advocates across America have been calling for, to make smarter, more evidence-based decisions. And honestly, police will benefit from that. When you have, just like how Chaz mentioned, when your only response to a mental health call is, at the very core of it, force, because you're calling in law enforcement, there's a problem in that structure. It just doesn't make any simple sense, right? And so we have to be very careful. And then another piece about this too, which I hope, again, just like how Chad says, I hope you don't get a whole bunch of nasty emails, but we have to take a look at who is leading these institutions that we want to be reformed. And those people have to be reformists. And if those people are not a reformist, then those people have to go. We need to take a very clear look at every single institution in education and healthcare and our economic systems. Who is at the top? Who is leading these structures? Policing, health, fire. Okay, I mean, who is at the top? And if they are not a person that, again, is anti-racist, meaning that they are actionable and ready for change, and that they are ready to get on board with valuing the life of people and humanity, then they need to step down. And a person that is qualified for that position needs to step up. And we need to be advocates for that change. There is no more coddling racism in America. It is over. And it is evident by the entire world standing up. And if we don't take this moment to make it a movement, Dr. Colette Pierce Burnett says that all the time, then we have failed, And I don't believe that this nation, that our city, that, our neighborhoods are willing to do that.
I have one question from the audience, one more I think I can get in before we have our call to action at the end. And here's the question. It says, I put the blackout up and was reprimanded by friends with good intentions. She's talking about on social media, or that I was blacking out the voices that need to be heard. Your conversation makes me think that it was okay to post the blackout. Can you please cast a light on what we can do in social media against racism? And let's face it, this is where a lot of people are getting information and sharing information. So I think that's a really valid question. Cast a light on what we can do in social media against racism. Simone, could you start that one?
Yes. And you know, and again, we have to be so careful with social media, because social media could be like an echo chamber too. So I would say if some of these people are your friends, pick up the phone, call them, talk to them, have these conversations in private, talk to them, because it's not gonna, we can respond, and yes, you should respond, but it's more long-term. It's a lot of times it's answering questions, talking through, listening, and it's not gonna happen overnight. So make that commitment. And I would say, amplify what you want the narrative to be, okay? If you don't stay focused on your message. It's so easy to get distracted by other things. You know, people talk about, well, the looters. It's like, okay, we are focusing on police brutality. Let's talk about that. And, you know, and I think, again, you know, focus on the message, work with people, connect with them outside of social media also, so that we can, as I said, it's a long ongoing conversation. It's not something that's just gonna, you know, you have your sound bites and then we move on. We need to make this a movement. So stay in the conversation with them, all right? Because I have so many college friends and childhood friends who think so differently from me. And sometimes, you know, you have school of thought saying, let's just, you know, unfriend them. They don't exist. However, that's, for me, that's not true. I interact with people. I want to make sure that I take the time and connect with them and go through it and let's work it out. I'm here. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to encourage people to stay in the conversation with their family, stay in the conversation with your mom, with your dad, with your brother, sister, your aunt, your uncle, your grandmom, your cousin, your neighbor. Stay in that conversation.
Anybody else want to weigh in on tangible things we can do on social media to be part of this revolution? Mimi?
Yeah, definitely. I think that this new normal of virtual connection, and this is social media, but then it's also a broader conversation. I think directly talking about, you know, social media, but like this is an opportunity now where many of us social justice organizations and like undoing racism, like everything has really gone digital, right? And so everything is like on social media. So this is a time of rapid unlearning of racism. And so if, you know, so amplify what's these different programs and projects that are happening, engage in these conversations that are happening. I know that our organizations are having, you know, different meetings and so forth. Attend those meetings. AJC just had a meeting and had hundreds of people on it. I mean, this is the change that we believe could, again, change those hearts of men, right? But it means that you need to engage. It means that you need to, you know, attend. I know that in Measure, we're having what's called the living room conversation, where, you know, hair bonnets are definitely allowed, and do-rags can also be, so in your own comforts of your home, you are able to engage and listen to the stories of Black women and Black girls during this conversation, right? We want you to attend those things, amplify them, share it. And anybody that tells you that you blacking out your screen because you're standing in solidarity or, you know, with Black people, that's called being racist. So ignore them and block them. That's that would be my suggestion. Just block them, you know, and call it a day. But this is the time where, again, we're going to start seeing some rapid unlearning, but it means that you have to take that first step of engagement.
Well, it's time for our call to action. And Chaz, I'm going to ask you to start, but if you want to weigh in on the social media issue during your call to action, that would be great too. But my final request is really for each of you to talk to the people watching. And I'm sure a lot of the faces look a lot like mine. They're white. Give us actionable ways we can become true allies in this fight against racism. Chaz?
Oh man, I think we have to kind of get over this word ally. Like I've been saying, ally is the person that, you have the Black Lives Matter sign in your yard, and, you wear the shirts with the fist and the names on it, which is great. But we need people to fully buy into this and become co-conspirators, right? We need people to actually enlist in this army of justice and righteousness and fight hand in hand with us. And I remind people all the time, it was a lot of allies in the 60s and 70s, but we needed more co-conspirators. And a prime example of that is the many young white men and women that were on they were freedom riders, right? A lot of people don't know that. It was a lot of white people that were freedom riders. And we need those type of white people to join in the fight as we try to undo racism and all these other things. Also find an organization that best aligns with you, politically and I guess ideology wise. And hopefully they're Black led, so you can do the work that you need to do. But it's also really good groups like Undoing White Supremacy Austin, right? Like we need white people to also have that conversation with themselves. Donating is always good. We have to stop expecting Black people to do this work for free. That is just insane to me that people, even with me, people think I should do this work for free, which is crazy. And I just can't afford to do that and live and be presentable, because if I looked unpresentable, people wouldn't listen to me. So, and just really, listen to Black people, listen to the people that are most affected by all of this stuff, and understand that Black people are not a monolith, right? Like we all have different opinions and views and perspectives. But talk to as many Black people as you can and see how you can help. And really, again, we live in a time of Google and all this stuff to where you can Google how to be an anti-racist and you can Google this stuff. So go do the research, right? One thing that's kind of annoying, if I can be completely honest, is, we get all this newfound attention and love and adoration, which I appreciate. But the more people call me and say, Chaz, what can we do? Like, tell me how to be a better white person. That's so emotionally and mentally draining on us. So, it's like, I don't ask ladies and women on how I become a better man. I go do that research, because that's also part of doing the work. So, again, I would just implore white people to do that work, take the time out and go research it, and just, get to work. And I'll end with this because allergies are killing me, but I always remind people of the Berlin Wall, right? Like one day people, some hippies were walking by and was like, this wall is dumb. Like this wall does not represent who we are and who we choose to be. And, people just started picking up their hammer and chisels, like literally, like they just started chiseling away at the wall day in and day out. And the more people saw them do that, the more people joined in, because, we like to all be a part of something. So, I say that to say, like, our wall in this country is racial inequity. It's like that. Until Black and white race relations get better, there's no future for this country, in my opinion. So we're fighting racism, we're fighting white supremacy, and that's a massive wall that is going to take all of us to chip away at. And whatever your hammer and chisel is, whether it's social media, whether it's resources like money or books, whatever, just pick that up, find what it is, and start chipping away. Because that's where we are. We're at a place to where we have to knock this wall down so we can get to a better place in society and in this country. And, everybody's hammer and chisel is different. So find out what yours is, find out what you can get a good grip and swing with, and just do that and just keep doing it. Do it every day. Do it day in and day out. That's, I don't know what else to say. That's all I got. Simone is going to clean this up so good that it's going to be unbelievable.
Chaz, that was pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. I give you an A+ on that call to action. Simone?
Again, I mean, Chaz said that so beautifully. We all have our unique gifts, right? And talents that are given to us, and how we develop them, and use those gifts and talents and resources to make a change in your sphere of influence. And put your money where your mouth is. Invest, donate. Our philanthropic community is powerful. Talk to your elected officials. Demand a change. Demand changes are made so that we can have more equity. That power, that wealth power piece, this is where you can make a big difference by talking to other powers and be, is on those dining tables, having conversations and lifting people up, talking about our moral duty, our value in making sure we leave this life a better place. And here it is, we in this world together right now, and we have this opportunity to make changes. What are we waiting on? Tomorrow is not promised us, all right? We have this moment in time right now, and this moment is a movement. It's a lifestyle change, and it's every day for the remainder of your life. And that's what I want you to do. And that call of action is, what are you gonna do every day, every moment for the remainder of your life to make this world more equitable?
Mimi, it's your turn. A call to action.
I love how Simone just said that, because this is such a complex question, right? That does not deserve a simple answer. And so a lifetime of humanitarianism, committing to that, is just a phenomenal way to say it. And so thank you, Simone. I would even just add to what, these two brilliant people said, is just, number one, just start asking questions. Question the system at every point. When you go to work, the next time you're on a Zoom chat or whatever your work looks like now, and you see all white faces, ask why there's not anyone else in there in that room. When you go drop your kid off at summer camp and you see that there's all white faces there, or none that, that look like me or Chaz or Simone here, ask the question of why. Ask what you need to do in order to usher in a more inclusive camp or workplace. So ask those questions. And then there's also, some very important sweeping, legislation that's just come out. Today, we saw one of the most extraordinary acts of solidarity at the highest level, right? We saw Pelosi and we saw Schumer with kente cloths on. Really? I would never think in my entire life, my husband just said, look at this. And I'm like, what? Are you serious? And so we are at a pivotal point where we can actually imagine or reimagine what this whole country could look like. We've had a tough a few years under the current administration. Let me be honest and let me be clear here. Racism has never been so prevalent to me, right? And so now is the time where we need to start looking at our leadership. We need to start, working to put Black women in leadership and in political leadership, right? We need to start these rallying calls. We need to get behind the Justice and Policing Act that was just introduced. New York introduced the Say Their Name Act, things like that. These are ways that you can get involved right now. And guess what? A lot of these on the ground organizations are amplifying that work locally. They're going to ask for these same reforms and these same things to be done right here in Austin. And you can be a part of that. Connect, fill out the application form, join, support. And if you don't have time to do that, you know, there's other ways to do it. Share a post, provide a donation, you know, simple ways. It's not until we get to the point where we say, I advocate for them because I am them, or I protest for her because I am her, or I support him because I am him. Are we going to start to see change? We understand that race is a social construct, and it takes us making these changes and making these very honestly simple things. These are simple requests. Ask the question, speak up. That's what we're asking for. And I think that hopefully those are some easy ways that you could start to get involved now.
I want to thank each of you, Chaz Moore, Mimi Stiles, Simone, Talma Flowers, for sharing your wisdom, for giving us actionable ways we can confront racism in our own lives, and for all the work you do to make this community more equitable. We could talk to you all day long. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to encourage people. This conversation will continue on Facebook, in the ATX Together Facebook group, and ATX Together group on Twitter. I want to thank everyone for watching today and caring enough to be part of this conversation. And I think that we all have a lot of work to do. Take care.
Thank you. And namaste, Judy.
Namaste.
Thanks, Judy.